Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.
And my name's Mick Coyle. Welcome to Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk. It's the 9th of January 2017 and it's time to talk. It's time to talk about mental health. It's time to talk about depression. It's time to talk about anxiety. It's time to talk about stress. And let's not shy away from any mental health issues on this show. Bipolar, anorexia, bulimia, post-traumatic stress disorder, postnatal depression, suicide, OCD, schizophrenia. Just not feeling quite right. Over the next few weeks, months, and let's hope years, this will be an outlet for people to share their stories. We're obviously not doctors, but we've got a forum to talk about mental health, and that's exactly what we intend to do. And now's as good a time as any to start. Today, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has made a speech in which she claims now is a historic opportunity to right the wrongs of mental health. She wants to tackle its hidden injustice shrouded in stigma. You'll hear her speech on the show today, and we'll have even more great content on the Mental Health Monday podcast, downloadable every Monday. Get involved yourself via the email address. My email, mick@radiocity.co.uk. That's mick@radiocity.co.uk.
Radio City Talks Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
Our first ever guest on Mental Health Monday is a Liverpool MP, MP for Wavertree and a former Shadow Minister for Mental Health, Luciana Berger. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mick, so much for inviting me to be a part of your show, and congratulations on starting this really exciting and fantastic segment.
I think episode 1, if we're going to call it episode 1, will simply be about talking about mental health, because that seems to be the reaction to the fact we've got the show. It's good that we're talking about it.
It's so important that we talk about it more, that we bring it out into the open. Historically, it's been something we've always hidden away. We don't like to talk about it. There is this big difference between how we talk about very openly, more often than not, our physical health. And yet when it comes to our mental health, there's been so many decades and in fact centuries of taboo and discrimination that exists around mental health. It's been quite hard, and particularly for older generations. And that's why it's so important that we do everything possible to break down those barriers and talk about it openly in every way that we should.
Just last week I was talking to a volunteer who got an MBE for the work he'd done with the Samaritans in Liverpool, and he'd worked with them and volunteered for more than 50 years. And he said that even back in the 1960s, he was aware that some people had, and because there was nothing scientific around at the time in regard to it, he said that people had a sadness about them. And I thought, wow, there have been people who've been talking about mental health and dealing with mental health, even though it's not even had a name or a brand or anything around it, for decades and decades and decades. You know, Winston Churchill used to talk about it as well. So it's always been a thing, but it is the thing that's in the background, the taboo that doesn't get mentioned, the thing which you don't talk about on the radio or in public because, you know, it's about yourself. It's personal, isn't it? But has there been a shift? Has there been a shift in the last year or so, do you think?
Well, I think there's been a shift since about the middle of 2000. We saw the introduction, well, it was 2008 that Time to Change was introduced, which was a national campaign to say we've got to break down these barriers. And they've actually done studies since that campaign started. It's been funded centrally by governments of all colours to show that there has been a shift in society's attitudes towards mental health. But while we've seen a shift, we've still got so much further to go because we're talking about it more. At the moment, we've got a few key points during the year where we have that focus. So we've got World Mental Health Day, which happens in the autumn. We've got something called Time to Talk Day, which is where we encourage workplaces to talk about mental health. Those are kind of key events. But beyond that, there's still more to do. And so while we're seeing a shift, and there has been a change, and it's fantastic, I think, to see people in the public eye talking a lot more openly, people of all ages. Particularly, we've seen some pop stars in the last year, Frankie from the Saturdays. We've seen Zayn Malik talk about, his experiences, Ruby Wax, others as well. We've still got some distance to go.
And I wonder whether or not now, because of the way that people are talking about it, mental health has become almost an umbrella topic, if you like, because people have talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. People have talked about, for instance, women after childbirth. And then suddenly those sort of issues have started to fall under a bracket of mental health. And I wonder if is that helpful? Because arguably then people might say, well, you're talking about mental health, but you're not talking about my mental health or my particular issue, that it's such a large thing. It's so broad that there's a danger that by trying to talk about it or offer not advice as such that you alienate people. You think, well, I've got a mental health issue, but this doesn't seem relevant to me. It's a huge thing now, isn't it?
It is huge. We have to start somewhere.
Yeah,
so just
exactly.
talk about it at all, it's definitely a step in the right direction. But as you rightly say, there are so many different conditions, some of which we don't even now in 2017 fully understand. That's why research is so important. And I'm part of a big campaign to ensure that we're getting more funds into mental health research so that every condition is adequately resourced and understood. But yes, when we talk about mental health, we might not necessarily be speaking to everyone.
Yeah.
And we do have to be mindful of that. It's both affects young people, older people, right through to old age. Men and women very differently. Different conditions affect different genders in different ways. So, eating disorders, for example, disproportionately impacts on women, whereas unfortunately male suicide is what kills the greatest number of men in our country under the age of 60 and under the age of 50 as well. So there's different conditions, and we just, by talking about it more, hopefully we'll cover all those bases, and for people to know that there's support available and that their particular condition or that what they're experiencing can be supported and they will be helped.
Absolutely. And if there are, traps to fall into or pitfalls, I will almost certainly on this show, Luciana, fall into them. And if people want to pick me up on them or tell me why, things or phrases I've used are inappropriate or not right for the particular context, absolutely email the show and tell me what it is that I've said. And then I think that idea that we're talking about it, we'll make mistakes, we'll get things wrong as we go, but we'll hopefully get it right. Now, you were the first Shadow Minister for Mental Health. You're still a very prominent campaigner on mental health issues. What's been the biggest reaction to you? So what have people said to you now that you're seen as a prominent campaigner?
Well, people feel able to speak to me in a way that they perhaps struggle to connect or engage with their own very, very close family and friends. So even in my weekly surgeries as a local MP, I've been struck by the number of people that have come to speak to me specifically about mental health. And I think it is more people as a result of knowing the work that I've been involved in. As you point out, I was the first ever Shadow Cabinet Minister for Mental Health, and now I'm the president of Labour's campaign for mental health. I'm very, very active in this area. And it's particularly men that come and want to have a chat, particularly men in their 40s, 50s, 60s, that, again, because of the work they know, that they've seen me involved in, perhaps they've read some articles I've written or seen me in the press. So they feel able to talk to me about it, but they still really struggle with their parents or with their siblings. Sometimes, people haven't been able to share at all the conditions that they've been experiencing, sometimes for decades. And that's part of why shows like this are so important, for people to know that we should be treating mental health in exactly the same way.
You're an MP, so you have, surgery, so you have an open door policy at times of the week where people can come and see you. But did you get a sense that essentially they were looking for a little chink of light, a little something, a little place to go? They'll understand, they'll get it. She'll get it, I'll go and speak to her.
Definitely, and also because by way of coming to see me, the other issues about making sure that we have equal access to mental health services. So again, we're making progress. But I still think, and I see it every week, that we've got some way to go to ensure that the same resource and the same targets and attention that we give to physical health, you go to accident and emergency, the A&E, and you expect to be seen within 4 hours. We don't have those same standards when it comes to mental health, and sometimes people get let down. They might be waiting for quite a few months to access talking therapies, or they might have found themselves in a mental health crisis and didn't get the attention that you'd expect if you, say, broke your arm, for example.
Well, this is true, but then if everybody who broke their arm, if 19 out of 20 of those people who had broken arms just kept it to themselves, the local services would say, well, there's only one person broken their arm there. And actually, 19 people have broken their arm, but they're just keeping quiet about it. And I wonder with the mental health thing, there's almost like a concern from the powers that be, those who, look at the coffers and the spending, think, well, almost if you poke the fire, what's going to come out the other side? Because you hear so many stats about it affecting 1 in 3 people, half of people within a certain generation. You talked about the suicide stats for men, young men. It's the number one killer. I wonder if there's been almost a reluctance from some to mention it, to talk about it, because you almost fear what it might mean. If you suddenly know there's a big problem, you've got to take action.
Yes, that's part of by way of talking about it more people are going to come forward, but people should feel able to come forward, and they should be able to access the same support through our National Health Service for a mental health condition that we expect and and do get when it comes to a physical health condition. And that's why myself and many others are really involved in trying to shift the focus onto making sure we help people earlier on, particularly young people. So we know the overwhelming majority of adults with a diagnosable mental health condition will have first developed it under the age of 18. And actually what we need to ensure is that we've got those resources in our schools again, and I listen to what head teachers locally say, sometimes the waits are too long for our teenagers to access mental health services. So we need to make sure those are available so we deal with it much, much quicker, much sooner, so it doesn't carry on into adulthood. And actually we could be making so much more of a difference if we made sure that every young person that needed it got the support they should be accessing in a timely fashion.
Is there a danger? And actually, it's interesting you raised that issue because we brought it up on this programme about a year or so ago, actually, and I'll recap it for Mental Health Monday. But it was the idea that as a 10-year-old, you could be flagged up as requiring assessment or a little bit of help for a particular issue. But then that child might not receive that help for the rest of their primary school career, and actually it would move into their secondary school career when their entire environment changes, and suddenly it's a completely different situation. But that wait has meant that the situation around the child has changed, and those problems which may have existed suddenly become much more ingrained.
Definitely, and that's why it's so important. We talk about mental health being often the Cinderella service of our NHS. Young people's mental health, we use the abbreviation CAMS, which stands for Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, is the Cinderella of the Cinderella services. It really gets less than 10% of the overall mental health budget, and actually we need to turn it on its head and make sure that young people get that support earlier on, but particularly at those transition points. So you mentioned at the age of 10, that's really important when coming to the end of primary school. Again, making sure that when children start secondary school, they're equipped and they're resilient enough to contend with making that transition. Also the transition from teenagers to adulthood. There's a big wider debate about whether we should make sure that our services for young people in mental health go up to the age of 25, because in some places they stop at 16 or 18, and actually that going into adult services at that age might not be appropriate. And that's something else that a number of us from people from all different backgrounds are campaigning on.
It's episode 1 of Mental Health Monday. Here on Radio City Talk, Luciana Berger is our special guest.
Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.
So it's episode 1 of Mental Health Monday, Radio City Talk. My name is Mick Coyle. Luciana Berger is a Liverpool MP and a prominent mental health campaigner politically and I guess socially now. I guess it becomes like a vocational thing, right? That you're an MP, you've got to do your regular work, but as you say, the mental health thing takes on a life of its own, if you like.
I'm really, really passionate about it, and I want as many people as possible to get involved in speaking about mental health, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in educational setting in schools and colleges, whether it's politically in the way that I do it as an MP, people can do it locally. We need as many mental health champions as possible to continue breaking down those barriers and to make it as normal as physical health.
When we talk about champions or the people who can raise the profile, you were the first shadow minister for mental health. There wasn't an opposite role, though, within cabinet, within government itself. Will it be the first actual minister of mental health which will be that first step? Or does it take... I want to say a normal politician. I'll say a normal politician, a prominent person to come forth and say, you know what, I'm a politician. I'm prepared to take action on this. Does it need to be someone with a mental health banner above their head or above their office, or can it be, a minister for sport, or can it be a minister for education who'll come out and say, you know what, we're going to deal with this because this is where I'm at with my life and this is where I've been? Well,
I think we're also going to see a journey. It's fair to say at the moment that mental health is being combined with lots of different things. At the moment, with the current government setup, it's one small element of a wider health minister's role. And actually, it should be front and centre until we've achieved that real equality for mental health. The technical term is parity of esteem. Until we really get that equality, I do think we need someone specific to take on that role, but not just to think about it in terms of our health services. And this is where I'm coming from, and this is where I'm particularly passionate, that I don't think, solve the challenges of our nation's mental health from the Department of Health, from our NHS services. And in fact, if we're thinking about it from that point, we're thinking about it too late. At the moment, it's what do we do when someone's in a crisis? What do we do when someone really needs support? And of course, that support should be available. But I think there's so much more we could be doing to keep people well, both for their physical health, but their mental health as well. And that starts in our schools, it starts in our communities, and it starts in our workplaces. And the role that I was previously doing was actually connecting mental health to what happened with our businesses, what happened in education, what happened in defence, all of those different things.
And this is what I'm going to ask you about next, because we're over an age politically where everything comes down, doesn't it, to spending, and if it's austerity or not, but spending money. And you were able in your shadow minister role to almost put figures around this and say, well, mental health has a cost to the economy, and it's this amount. So if you solve the problem, the economy's worth so much more. And some of those figures they weren't small figures. They weren't a few million quid, were they?
I mean, it's absolutely staggering that what the figures are. And it's not my figures. It's a figure that the London School of Economics came up with through an extensive study. It's a figure that the government accepts. So it's not just my figures, it's the opposition. It's accepted all around that the cost to our economy every year of not adequately dealing with our nation's entire mental health, it includes things like days lost because of sickness, obviously the cost to our NHS, cost to criminal justice, all of those different things packaged together is a staggering £105 billion a year. It's almost as much as we spend on the entire NHS, and it's double our defence budget.
£105 billion,
yes,
which would exist if mental health was not an issue. So we talk about, productivity crisis in the UK and all that. That would all be that could all be solved by dealing with mental health, but it's not going to be dealt with tomorrow. It's a long-term process, isn't it? And there's long-term planning that's got to go into this. So at what point do we start going, right, well, let's make it a 5-year project, a 10-year project, a 15-year project, and then every single person who comes into it, I presume, then ends up on their own 5-year plan, 10-year plan, 15-year plan. It takes a lot of long-term thinking, this, doesn't it?
It does, but it's not even long-term thinking. It's, I think we can make a difference just by thinking about mental health and everything that we do. And again, it comes down to prevention. I think there's just so much more we could be doing to think about how we prevent illness and how we keep people well. And at the moment, it's just so skewed the wrong way that we only help people once they're really, really in need of support, whether that's for any condition, be it physical health or mental health. And that's where I think we're getting it so wrong, because actually prevention, we know, is so much cheaper than cure. And I'm not, I don't like talking about it in the economic terms, the financial cost. I think it's quite ugly to be talking about it that way, but I think it's necessary to actually highlight the extent of the challenge to our country of this issue. But I'm swayed first and foremost and motivated by the reasons why it's important when it comes to our mental health to do something sooner and quicker, because it means we keep more young people in education. It means we keep more adults in work. It means we help people to maintain their relationships with their family and their friends. It means that we can ensure that more people can keep their tenancies or keep their tenancies secure or keep paying the mortgage. All those reasons make a difference. And I think that's what would make our country a better country and our communities better communities if we really thought about how we make that difference earlier on. At the moment, as I said, we're too skewed the wrong way.
In your understanding, it's always struck me about lifestyles and how people have made, I'll call them lifestyle changes, because to a certain extent they are, that have put them on a better path. That it's not been something which has required the equivalent of, heart bypass surgery or something, or brain surgery. It's been small changes, small ways of thinking about things differently, dealing with matters in your life that you've not been able to deal with before. And they've allowed people to change their journey and slowly come back into so-called everyday life. And that's it's not a cheap way of doing things, because every sort of path has got to be set out and helped along the way. But it's a very simple way. They are complex problems, but actually in many ways with simple solutions. And that's quite an optimistic way of looking at it. Actually, there's big problems in regard to mental health, but we have to be optimistic about how simple some of the solutions might actually be for some people.
Very much so. I mean, there's things that we can all do just by being a bit more thoughtful and kinder that don't cost anything. They can make a real difference to a close family member, a friend, or a neighbour even. Loneliness, for example, is a massive issue which impacts on mental health of many, particularly older people, and also impacts on our physical health as well. You're a lot more likely to suffer, you mentioned, to heart conditions, vascular disease. The two things are very much interconnected. So if we all took a bit more time to check up on our neighbours, just, I'm very mindful. I've got a 97-year-old grandma that, I pick up the phone and give her a call so she's got that contact. And if you looked at some of the awful statistics of the number of people that can go a whole month without speaking to someone, those are the things that we should be thinking about that can really, really make a difference. Also being physically active, just having a walk every day. People often talk about physical activity in the context of weight loss. Actually, it's more important for our mental health that we just take time to be outside, and just, having a 20-minute walk a day can make a massive difference. If people have access to smartphones, if they're on the internet, just even for free, you can get access to mindfulness apps. Again, something that even if you were to download one that costs, it's £1.99. And just doing that for 5 minutes a day can make a real difference to your life.
Tell us about mindfulness, because it's a word which I've become more and more aware of, and it seems like it's going to be a word we're going to be hearing a lot of throughout 2017. Can you sum up the essence of what mindfulness is all about? It's the equivalent of fitness, right? Is it like the equivalent of fitness, like physical fitness you have? But then you have mental mindfulness.
I don't know the exact definition of it. I think it's open to interpretation. People interpret it in different ways. It's essentially, in my view, and so I've endeavoured to be mindful and to take 5 minutes out of my day I do have one of these apps, and to do it is just taking 5-10 minutes out just to reflect and to be aware of your surroundings and what you're going to be doing, whether it's at the start of the day or to reflect on the day gone past. So it just makes you more mentally aware, and it can also calm you down, and is shown to have a direct correlation again with your physical health. I went to go visit one of the the world leading academic units in Cardiff that has done some very, very extensive research into mindfulness, and it has been shown to make a difference to people's mental health and their physical health as well.
And that feeds into that idea that we all have busy lives, and we always say this, we've all got busy lives now, but I mean, we do. I mean, it's absolutely true. We do have busy lives, but that period of reflection, and we'll call it reflection, that the option of going, let me have a think about what I thought about that. A lot of people will feel, actually, I don't have time for that. I don't make time for that anymore. Even the moments where you go and lie in bed, you might have your phone on, or, you're dealing with the kids, or whatever it would be. That those moments for mindfulness, some people will think, I don't have time for that. But making time for that, even if it is 5 minutes, could make a difference to people's lives.
It can make a big difference. And it is but it is also hard to find the time. And that's one of the challenges and pressures of 21st century living, that, so much is expected of people. We work longer hours, trying to juggle, different commitments. People often separated from family if they live in different places across the country. So all those things have a bearing on what you can do. But and it is, as I know from my own experience, it's hard to even find those 5 minutes. But the benefits outweigh those 5 minutes, and it's worth doing if you can make it happen.
But it's because you think you're not doing anything. The point of it is to stop and to think and to pause. But then that idea, I'm pausing now, I'm not doing anything, and that idea that it's wasted time. But actually, it's almost like a mental recharge, isn't it?
It's mental recharge. It's also a relaxation technique as well. So it's in terms of slowing down the heartbeat. Actually, it has a physical impact as well. It's many different benefits from doing it. I mean, sometimes I fall asleep.
Even better. You can't beat a little bit of sleep to help you on the journey. Luciana, thank you for appearing in episode 1 of the programme.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really, really wonderful to have a chat, and I wish you really every success with this segment.
We're going to keep going and just keep doing it, and it's about talking, and as long as people want to talk, and I think hopefully people we'll just keep talking about it. And I think that's one of the important things to do, that if we just keep talking about it, other people might go, I might talk about it too, and then it becomes the rolling stone, if you like, that hopefully will gather lots of moss as it travels down the hill. Thank you for your time. Thank you for speaking to us. It does feel like there's a need to talk. It does feel like people have sort of gone, actually, it's good, this. It's actually on the radio, and people could download and listen to it as a podcast as well. And it struck me that's never existed elsewhere, that nobody else has thought of it before.
Well, I definitely know from the one-off shows that I've been involved in that the response has been overwhelming, whether that's on social media, on Twitter or Facebook, or the people that have, as a result of hearing me on a local show or a national show, they've emailed me in response. People just feel that we've got some, they just don't hear enough of it, and they need to. And by way of talking about it, I think I know from the responses that I've had, it can really make a difference to people feeling able to come forward. And if we can make that difference, then that's fantastic.
Luciana Berger, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
It's Mental Health Monday from Radio City Talk. My name's Mick Coyle.
Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
This is Radio City Talk.
You're listening to Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk. Luciana, Berger there. Get involved in the show yourself. Drop me an email, mick@radiocity.co.uk. Now, the 9th of January was quite a prominent time to start Mental Health Monday because it was the same day that Theresa May, the Prime Minister, made a keynote speech on the issue of mental health. You can hear what she had to say now, then we'll get reaction from prominent mental health campaigners.
What I'm announcing are the first steps in our plan to transform the way we deal with mental health problems at every stage of a person's life, not in our hospitals, but in our classrooms, at work, and in our communities. This starts with ensuring that children and teenagers get the help and support they need and deserve, because we know that mental illness too often starts in childhood, and that when left untreated, it can blight lives and become entrenched. There is, for example, evidence to suggest an increase in self-harm among young people, with the number of 16 to 24-year-old women reporting self-harm increasing threefold to 1 in 5 between 2000 and 2014. And we know that the use of social media brings additional concerns and challenges. In 2014, just over 1 in 10 young people said they'd experienced cyberbullying by phone or over the internet. So first, we will introduce a package of measures to transform the way we respond to mental illness in young people, starting in our schools. We will pilot new approaches, such as offering mental health first aid training for teachers and staff to help them identify and assist children experiencing mental health problems. And we will trial approaches to ensure schools and colleges work closer together with local NHS services to provide dedicated children and young people's mental health services. These steps will accompany a major thematic review led by the Care Quality Commission with input from Ofsted, looking at services for children and teenagers across the country to find out what is working and what is not. Following this, CQC and Ofsted will consider how their future joint programme of inspections can ensure child and adolescent mental health services are properly held to account for performance. And alongside these reviews, later this year, we will bring forward a new green paper on children and young people's mental health to transform services in education and for families. These measures will build on the work we're already doing to put a stop to the untold misery of hundreds of children being sent halfway across the country to access mental health services. By 2021, no child will be sent away from their local area to be treated for a general mental health condition. But treatment is only part of the answer. We must look at what more can be done to prevent mental health problems and work with you to capitalise on the crucial role civil society has to play in helping young people and indeed people of all ages build resilience. Second, I want us to do more to support mental well-being in the workplace. So I've asked Lord Stevenson, who's campaigned on these issues for many years, and Paul Farmer, CEO of Mind and chair of the NHS Mental Health Task Force, to work with leading employer and mental health groups to create a new partnership with industry and make prevention and breaking the stigma top priorities for employers. Because mental well-being doesn't just improve the health of employees, it improves their motivation, reduces their absence, and drives better productivity too. We will also review employment discrimination laws for employees with mental health problems to ensure they're properly supported. And we will do everything we can to get the right support to those with mental health problems who are out of work. For example, through our global leadership on social impact bonds, which drive investment in social outcomes, we're already providing up to £50 million to support those with mental health issues back into work and help local areas tackle the link between drug and alcohol dependency and coexisting mental health problems. Third, I want to ensure more people get the support they need when they need it in their communities. So we will make up to £15 million of extra funding available for community clinics, crisis cafes and alternative places of safety to support a wider range of preventative services in the community and ensure that charities, churches and community organisations can access funding to run them too. And we're already investing over £10 million to support the Fast Track Think Ahead programme, which aims to increase the number of high-calibre mental health social workers by at least 300. Fourth, we will rapidly expand the treatment available by investing £67.7 million in digital mental health services. Online therapy has the potential to transform the way mental health services are delivered by allowing people to check their symptoms, be triaged online, and receive clinically assisted therapy over the internet much more quickly and easily, assuming it is clinically appropriate. These treatments have been tested in other countries, and they work. In the right cases, they can offer access to treatment far quicker than traditional services. Fifth, we will right the everyday injustices that those with mental illness encounter, starting by examining GP forms relating to mental health and debt. Because sometimes those whose illness has resulted in debt, or means they are struggling to pay their debt, have to prove their mental ill health to debt collectors and pay their GP to fill in a form to do so. Such a process can worsen both mental illness and financial difficulties. So we'll work with the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute to consult on these forms with a view to ending the practice. And finally, today we are publishing a strengthened cross-government suicide prevention strategy, which sets out a comprehensive plan to reduce the suicide rate in this Parliament and targets those most at risk, such as young and middle-aged men, those in contact with the criminal justice system, and those in the care of mental health services. Because on average, 13 people kill themselves every day in England. And if we want to improve the life chances of current and future generations, we need to address this shocking reality. And in addition to all this, we will ensure that the NHS itself takes the steps it needs to ensure that parity means just that, parity. We will hold the NHS leadership to account for the extra £1 billion we invested in mental health last year. We will make sure that mental illness gets the attention it deserves in funding, research and technology investment. And we will be clear that when NHS leaders are redesigning services and developing new local solutions, mental health should get its full weighting.
So we've heard from Theresa May, the Prime Minister. She's been setting out her government's new strategy to tackle mental health. But how far does it go? How far have the government gone so far? And are we now turning over a new leaf when it comes to mental health provision in this country? Let's get a take on this one with someone who I think we're going to become pretty familiar with on Mental Health Monday. Sue Baker is the director at Time to Change. Sue, thank you for your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Mick, and congratulations on running your first mental health spot. It's brilliant. Good timing.
Very good timing. Just before we come on to Theresa May, just tell us about the work you do at Time to Change.
Yeah, sure. We've been running Time to Change for about 9.5 years now. It's a partnership with two big mental health charities, Mind and Rethink Mental Illness. And we're England's biggest ever campaign to address the stigma and discrimination that those of us with mental health problems face.
What was your gut reaction, your gut instinct, when you heard Theresa May's speech a little bit earlier on?
Well, we sort of knew privately that this speech was coming, and I think regardless of the detail, which we'll come on to in a second, I think it's really encouraging that it's her first domestic speech on any health issue. So the fact she's chosen mental health and has spoken so clearly about the need, as she said, to right the wrong of a hidden social injustice of mental health and stigma is really, really encouraging. I mean, to have a Prime Minister do a speech anyway is great, but for it to be her first speech on health is really, really encouraging. It's about time mental health had a higher profile and priority.
In terms of then what this government actually does, the actions will in the end speak a lot louder than words. What did you take from Theresa May in terms of what her plans are that will actually change the face of the way we deal with mental health in this country?
Yeah, and it's something that she does say that every organisation has a role to play and every individual and every community does, and that's absolutely what we would endorse. So we talk about ourselves as a movement, so we've got over 500 pledged employers who work with nearly half of all secondary schools. We've got thousands of champions. We've done some great work in Liverpool as well, which has been brilliant with local champions and the local authority and voluntary sector groups. But we need this across the whole country. And I think for us, what's really encouraging, there are three things in particular that we're really encouraged by. And one is that secondary schools are going to get more training for teachers, which, it's our very much our dearest wish that that mental health gets embedded in the school curriculum. But this is a good start. That employers should be encouraged to do more on mental health in the workplace for everybody's mental health and well-being. And we, as I say, we do a lot of work with hundreds and hundreds of employers across all sectors, and we want to see this in every workplace in Britain. And also the fact that she's talked about the need to improve attitudes as well, which again is something that we've been working on. We've seen progress, we've seen attitudes start to change, but this is the work of a generation. These things aren't solved overnight, but we have started to shift the way that some people start to think and act about mental health issues and respond to those of us that have them.
For those, and there'll be many people who'll be saying, this all sounds like great news, but equally, I know many different teachers who will say, brilliant, that's great as well, but are people aware of the amount of pressure that teachers are under at the moment? And workplaces, often talk about, the bureaucracy and red tape which exists. And I wonder whether or not there is a danger that unless you get firm financial backing with this, it becomes a burden too far. For many years, you'll be aware, the pastoral care within schools and good old-fashioned nursery nurses, there were plenty of people in a school who could take on this work. Many teachers would say now, it's just going to be something else to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, from what Theresa May was talking about, she's talking about there needing to be a greater link up between schools, and in which she means secondary schools, and local child and adolescent mental health services, CAM services as they're called. And absolutely there needs to be a better interface between schools themselves and teachers and the local NHS that should be providing expert help to young people with mental health problems. It's 1 in 10 children, that's 3 children in every classroom has a mental health problem. So there's no escaping the fact that it is absolutely the role of the NHS, but it's also the role of the school to respond to pupils more appropriately and to refer them to the NHS. What we need to make sure is that those services are there for children and young people when they need them. So they need to be easily accessible and readily available rather than, you don't want long waiting lists. So this money has to get to the front line. It's the same with the workplace. 1 in 6 British workers has a mental health problem. So you can't ignore the fact that mental health is something that is being that is present in every workplace and every workforce. So again, let's have better support within the workplace, and let's make sure that when people need help, that they get it from the NHS when they get referred through.
One of the things I was keen to touch on, you'll know the figures about half of mental health problems start by the age of 14, 75% by the age of 18. So obviously if you can get into the schools, that's absolutely brilliant, because if you can, nip these sort of issues in the bud from an early age and get in and speak to these young people at a very early age, that's absolutely fantastic. But children only spend a certain amount of time within a school environment, don't they? I mean, there's obviously the home environment that exists as well. Is that maybe a piece of the jigsaw which might have been overlooked in this particular speech but needs to be part of the way we move forward? That children don't just develop these issues within the school environment. Children's lives are complex away from the school through their social background, through their family background, their upbringing, the sort of social media world in which they live now.
Yeah, Mick, I'm really glad you raised that. So thank you for pointing that out. Time to Change has been running its campaign for 9 years, but a couple of years ago we started to move from just focusing on adults to focusing with children and young people, but more importantly for our social marketing campaign at their parents. So we did research that found that parents didn't want to have conversations about mental health at home, and we also found that children and young people didn't want to have conversations with their parents. So as much as is the parental role, this was something that parents thought was key to their looking after their children's well-being. They didn't want to have the conversations, and neither did their children, we found in research.
When you're faced with that, the kids don't want to talk about it, and if they do, they certainly don't want to talk to their parents.
Well, yeah, we called it a non-versation, so the opposite of a conversation, that either party didn't want to talk about it. So we've got to help parents talk to their children at home, and to do it in a way that doesn't alarm their children, thinking, oh gosh, my parent thinks I've got a mental health problem. And equally, we have a campaign aimed at young people, so we have 11 to 18s as another primary audience of our campaign, and a lot of our, as I say, we're working with half of all secondary schools. Any school can get involved that's a secondary school, so look us up and use our tools and resources and materials. And we know that it can shift young people's attitudes. So young people, we're encouraging them to talk to their peers, but to go home and talk to their parents. So parents equally shouldn't be alarmed if their children talk to them about mental health. They shouldn't jump to the conclusion that their young person is distressed. We all need to talk about mental health, regardless of whether we've got symptoms of it or not.
Now, there's a whole host of phrases which, as you can imagine, we've launched Mental Health Monday, and I'm being whacked in the face by a lot of phrases which I may never have heard of, but only been aware of maybe in the outer reaches of things that have been talking about. Mindfulness has been the big one which has come forward. Mindfulness. But there was a phrase which I thought was really interesting, and it was mental health first aid training. Now, we've all done the St John Ambulance course when we were at school, and some people have been topped up on the various first aid courses that they've done. But this idea of secondary schools being offered mental health first aid training, almost like a rapid response from somebody who's had an amount of training. I thought that was an interesting idea. What does it look like or sound like, mental health first aid training?
And it's exactly, it's a bit like the Heinz baked bean tin, isn't it? It's exactly what it says in the tin. So that effectively what it does is give people the tools and understanding that how do you spot somebody that might be struggling with mental health problems? So how can you spot and how can you have those conversations early on to encourage somebody to open up and get help? And if someone's in distress, how do you approach them and support them? And it's absolutely just as important that we have that kind of training in the same way that we have training to help somebody that might be, struggling with their physical health or in crisis with their physical health. So it's really good, isn't it, to talk about it in the same kind of language as we talk about, first aid for the physical body. So it's good training. We know that employers like it, and mindfulness is something else that employers like to provide to their staff, is workshops on that, because we've all got mental health, just like we've all got physical health.
Has today been a game changer? Not the launch of Mental Health Monday, by the way, but in terms of which I'm sure it will be in the future.
I'm sure it is.
The Prime Minister coming out and making this speech, does this maybe change, maybe a conversation you and I might be having in 3 years' time? Will this be a defining moment?
Yeah, I hope so, Mick. I think many of us hope so. I've been at this for over 20 years now, and Prime Ministers have come and gone. But the fact that this is the Prime Minister's first domestic health speech, I think is really encouraging that it's about mental health. But clearly we're all hoping to see the delivery have an impact, and this isn't a one-hit wonder, I think, as the Prime Minister herself said, and as we've said, this is going to take years. This is the work of a generation. But the good thing is that attitudes have started to shift. We need to see those resources get to the front line, and in that way we'll start to see positive impact. So, yeah, it's a good start, but we're all going to be keeping an eye out and keeping tabs on progress.
We've got a date in our diary for the 2nd of February, by the way, Time to Talk Day. If people want to find out some more information about the work you're doing there, it's via your website, isn't it?
Yeah, if people just do a Google Time to Change, it will come up, and then click on. Yes, it's our National Day of Talking About Mental Health. We're trying to keep the conversation going for 24 hours on the 2nd of Feb. It's the 5th time we've done this National Day of Talking. So if anybody, schools, workplaces, sports groups, communities, individuals that want to speak out, if you want to take part, please go online and find out there's resources there and free materials. So let's get the nation talking. Let's get all of your viewers talking about mental health. Listeners talking on the 2nd of Feb would be fabulous.
Brilliant.
But congratulations on your big news show. We're really thrilled to hear about it.
Hey, thanks for being part of episode 1, Sue. We really appreciate you coming on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.
Yeah, great to get Sue Baker on episode 1 of Mental Health Monday. Right, we're going to have loads of different opinions on the show. Some you'll agree with, some you will disagree with. We had a couple of guests in the studio just a wee bit earlier, and we'll bring you their opinions now, their reaction to what they heard from Theresa May. Everyone's listened to the same speech but thinks differently about them. Rachel Kearney has done mental health training for young people in the city of Liverpool, and Jim Johnson is from Peshkar Productions. They offered their own insights into what Theresa May had to say.
Liverpool Live, the panel on Radio City Talk.
It's been a massive topic in the news for quite some time now. There's a lot of I mean, it's not age-specific mental health issues, it's right across the board. So we've got an increasing number of elderly people with things such as dementia and Alzheimer's, but also loneliness.
Yeah, isolation.
And that isolation. But on the flip side of that, you've got a lot of young people who, because they live their lives through Facebook and kind of social media and this almost virtual reality, massive increase on loneliness for young people as well. I was a mental health promotion trainer for 3.5 years for Merseyside Youth Association. I used to work with the children and young people's workforce. There's nothing new in what she's saying. What I can say is, after working directly with a lot of really vulnerable groups, I genuinely don't feel that a lot of the money and the funding that is being put into it is meeting those frontline services.
No.
And I think a lot of it is going into training, but there's only so much training you can do when you're looking at the severity of some of those episodes that some really vulnerable people are having, then actually where are the services there to actually provide that provision? And honestly, my opinion, I don't think they are. So it needs to be looked at. Instead of spending money on massive advertising campaigns, we need to provide more kind of service level and that frontline services for people who are vulnerable.
I mean, I think the Prime Minister's got a huge amount of gall to even to cynically. I find it an extremely cynical move on her part to be talking about mental health in this way when her government has systematically victimised the most vulnerable in society, who, as a consequence of their vulnerability through living on the breadline, has exacerbated a number of mental health issues, and they are and a government that continually targets the most vulnerable in society, exacerbating those mental health issues. Frankly, why somebody isn't just in the media, isn't just calling that out and saying, that's all very well, Prime Minister, you highlighting these things, but what are you doing about situations that you have created by policy making?
It's just, I mean, simply looking at the universal credit, looking at the whole kind of really targeting people who have claimed incapacity benefit for one reason or another. You know, there's massive amounts of services that have been cut. For example, young people with disabilities and learning difficulties, the amount of money that's been cut from those services, and then these families are massively struggling. Yeah. And it just seems like there's a lot of talk that gets said about it, but the direct work actually isn't being done.
So, but then this is one of the big things that people say, the fact that people are talking about it, the fact that Theresa May is making a speech about mental health today and parity with other services and, you know, putting mindfulness on the same level of fitness, that's got to be a positive thing. If it's a cynical political step, Jim, at least it's a cynical political step, which is using the banner mental health, which is talking about mental health.
Well, that's fair enough, but she, you know, Just recently, she's gone on record as telling the country what a great job she thinks Jeremy Hunt's doing, and Jeremy Hunt's in charge of the National Health Service, which is, I mean, this government has been stripping the National Health Service for 2 parliaments now. In such a way that it is almost unrecognisable from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. Ask somebody who works in the mental health industry, and ask what they think of the services that they're trying to support. I mean, and we're talking about a healthcare provision on one hand, which is I completely agree. A greater understanding of mental health as a thing can only be a good thing for society because it is the silent disease.
Well, that's what I mean, but at least today she sets out her stall that she can then be specifically held to account on.
She can be, but I want to see the numbers, Mick. I want to see the numbers because we've seen a lot from this government about cuts to public services, the National Health Service in particular, and they want to privatise it. Of course they do. They think privatisation of those services is a good thing. What do they genuinely think that through this policy of cutting to the National Health Service and privatising it, that by talking about mental health, that it's going to be able to get to the services are going to be able to get to those people who desperately need them? Because what tends to happen in these things, if you are living on the poverty line, or you don't have access to a job or basic human rights and human needs, then and of course your mental health is going to be under a huge amount of pressure.
So and this is the point which we'll absolutely talk about now, and we've got time to do it. So let's do it. You can set out what to do to tackle the issue of mental health, because it is happening. 13 people every day are taking their lives. Across the globe, 1 in 4 people will be affected by mental health issues. But Jim raises the point that those mental health issues come to the fore in society. And if you're the government in that society, what are the reasons that people are getting mental health issues in the first place? It's that firefighting thing, isn't it? It's putting smoke detectors in or sending out a fire engine to put out the flames. There's a balance to be struck there, isn't there?
There's absolutely a balance to be struck when you're looking at mental health, what you do. And, certainly when I was delivering training around it, you're looking at risk factors and resilience factors. So I'll explain just basically what that means. When you're looking at risk factors in people's lives, you're looking at things such as having a learning difficulty, living in poverty, living in poor housing,
living in isolation, living
in loneliness, domestic violence, all kinds of things, right the way through to inappropriate schooling, all those kinds of things. So risk factors, that's a big list. When you're looking at resilience factors, you're looking at self-esteem, confidence, an ability to stand on your own 2 feet. You're looking at aspirations and hopes for the futures, an ability to set goals, good role models, people around you to support you, a good social standard, okay? We know that people with one risk factor have a 1 to 2% probability of experiencing mental health issues. With 3 risk factors, it jumps up to 17%. With people who've got 4 or more risk factors, if you think about anyone within this building today, at one point or another in your lives, you're going to have 4 or more risk factors in your life. You've got a 20% probability of experiencing mental health issues. That's high. So when you're looking at it in that context, but the other thing is mental health fluctuates, and dependent on what's going on in your life will depend on your mental health. In the same way physical health fluctuates. One day you can wake up feeling fine, the next you've got a massive cold, or you're feeling rubbish, or something's aching. It's the same with your head. It's the same with your brain. It's the same with your mental health, okay? So really, talking about it's fantastic, because it's getting away from that stigma of mental health. But like you said, Mick, it's putting in those smoke alarms before the fire goes off. And basically, it's about pointing out to people, if you feel like this is where you can go for help. But if you're going there for help and you're getting, actually, this is an emergency, or we can't see you for another 3 months' time, actually, you're going to have to get on with it. By the time that person will either do one of 2 things, okay? So that person will either go, do you know what? What's the point? I'll try and get on with it myself. Or the person will go, okay, 3 months. They've got a massive amount of time to wait. So this is where I'm talking about those frontline services not being there. No point talking about it if you're not going to deal with it. If you're going to deal with it, make sure those services are there for people to talk to, for people to access, all of those things, so that people can actually deal with it before it becomes a massive problem.
But the other thing as well is, this comes on the back of yesterday, her announcements that there's going to be no soft Brexit. There's going to be no, there's going to be no deals struck. So she's come out with this extremely hard line. The cynic in me, and I question anybody to question anything that anybody says. Look behind it. Look at the reason behind it. That a lot of this is a way of saying, we're not the nasty party. We are a caring party. Well, actually, behind the scenes, they're setting an agenda for the Brexit negotiations, which clearly have had no ratification, from Parliament. There was nothing in those discussions about maintaining things like the single market and things like that. And so when we talk about, and I know that it feels like these two things are not related, but politically they are entirely related, because she's an unelected Prime Minister who is residing over a firestorm in the political sector, a very, very weak opposition who aren't challenging her. So it's the responsibility for, perhaps not yourself, Mick, because you need to remain impartial, as a broadcaster. But when myself and Rachel come on these shows, I think it's important that we say, actually, we know the mental. I mean, it's brilliant you've got Rachel on here today, because she's extremely well informed on the subject, and everybody knows somebody who's affected by the black dog or whatever you want to call it. But it doesn't alter the fact that it's our responsibility as broadcasters to question the veracity of why these make the statements, why today. Covering
up one decision that the government make on the one hand and covering it up with something else. Fantastic. Talk about mental health. Don't just talk about it, though. Do something about it. Because for me, especially, I had a situation that happened last week dealing with a young person who was extremely distressed. And I know the services aren't necessarily wrapping around these young people who are incredibly vulnerable, in the same way that a lot of people are struggling and really struggling to cope and really struggling with the mental health. And that, you know what? When you ask for help and you don't get the help, genuinely, people do one or two things. The highest incidence of suicide is among young men, aged 18 to 25. Yeah. Why? Because do you know what? Young men find it harder to talk about how they're feeling, and when they do, they're not listened to, or their concerns aren't responded to, which means they've gone, well, I've tried, and they close right down again, and they get to the point where it's like, I'm done, I've had enough. And I think really, if we're looking at things like this, it needs to be those frontline services that are in place. Unfortunately, a lot of that frontline delivery and that frontline support is falling to the charity and voluntary sector, which is being massively impacted, hugely impacted by cuts.
Mental health knows no boundaries. It doesn't target the poor. It targets anybody and everybody. So, but the difference is, if you come from a middle class background, or you have access to a reasonable standard of living, you're going to find it easier to find or seek the help that you require, whether that be private therapy, or being able to just ensure that you have things in place. Like we opened this conversation today about talking about going to the gym and stuff like that. We all know that if you are into health and fitness, you know that the chemical reaction that goes off in your brain through the endorphin release is really good for your general mental health.
Well, I genuinely do exercise. Yeah. I mean, everything else I do is vicariously beneficial. Honestly, genuinely, if I don't go to the gym a couple of times a week or get out and have some fresh air, my head starts to pop, and I'm happy to talk about that on air. But
the issue is then that if you don't have that access, or you can't get access to that kind of provision, then you are going to be a more vulnerable case. And I go back to the Brexit thing. We were promised £350 million a week extra into the NHS. It was on the bus, and then certain people after that we were told that actually that was a promise that they couldn't keep. Well, we should be holding the Prime Minister to that promise, and we want to know which bit of the £350 million a week is she going to allocate to improving mental health services, please, Theresa.
And I think that's the thing. I mean, it really is. It just infuriates me to the point of I'm fed up with people talking about it. I think it's fantastic to talk about it on air as we are now. But you know what? do something about it, because people are becoming more isolated, more lonely. Children, young people's health is plummeting, and mindfulness is fantastic. But you know what? Don't counterbalance that with the massive pressure that GCSEs and SATs are putting on young people. Don't counterbalance that with the massive pressure of not being able to aspire and to actually look at things and look at going to, into full-time education. We both went to university. My fees got paid. I'm sure your fees got paid.
They certainly did.
From a working...
mine didn't. What's going on here?
But from a working class background...
Yeah, we marched on your behalf, though, Mick.
Yeah. But loads of young people won't even get... That's not a possibility, because you're getting into £10,000 worth of debt before you get your student loan, before you've done your degree. So we can't... Mindfulness is fantastic. I do mindfulness. I practice mindfulness with young people. But you know what? It's something that is a drop in the ocean.
Which is, and this is such a huge thing that goes so far and wide. And we talked about mindfulness. You talked about the fact if you don't go for a run a couple of days a week,
absolutely,
your head pops, I think was the phrase.
But it genuinely does. I start to feel really sluggish, and things start to become on top of me and stuff like that. And I know by going to the gym or spending a lovely weekend walking, that didn't cost anything.
Which is good. But it's interesting. You raised that point, but I think Jeremy Hunt said, go and see friends, go for a run, go for a jog. And then people accused him of being patronising about that advice, because that was coming from somebody who was in charge of the NHS.
He needs to look after the doctors, doesn't he, and make sure they go for a run.
Jeremy Hunt's responsibility is not to tell people what to do. His responsibility is to provide a service, right, whereby experts can help those people who need the help. Yeah. And that's the problem that he's got. It's this kind of... I mean, Theresa May was guilty of this when she was the Home Secretary, going in and talking to the police force. You want to talk about mental health? Talk to people in the police force about the shift work that they have to do, about the lack of the lack of services. I've got a friend who's a custody sergeant who works extremely long hours. His wife, who's a nurse, they often don't see each other, for weeks on end because of the shift patterns. So the chances of them seeing their family together is there. And you ask him about the cuts that her government have made to services in order to not be able to do the jobs effectively or as well resourced as they could be. And then talk about being spat at by somebody who has got a mental health problem because they found themselves in custody. I mean, I'd love to know what percentage of people that are currently in custody, thanks to Theresa's policies as the Home Secretary, right, are actually there because they've got poor mental health.
Well, I can tell you the statistics around young people. So 92% of young people held in secure settings, and that is kind of remand centres as well as young offenders institutes, have a diagnosed mental health issue or a learning difficulty or a disability. 92%. Yeah,
and Jeremy, it would appear that Jeremy and Theresa's response to that is get them to go for a run.
Well, if we're looking for a bit of balance on this one, Jim, obviously you've been talked about the fact that these are politicians. Is there anything that she could have said today? This is a Prime Minister talking about mental health, raising the issue, saying, let's have parity, let's look at this, let's look at the way we're doing things. Is there anything she could have said today which you would have gone, good on you, that's the right thing to say about mental health?
Here's X amount of money that we're going to promise to this service.
Thank you.
Isn't that what the Prime Minister does?
Yeah.
It needed a financial. It needed
instead of a fluffy little wraparound.
That has been done.
We've done this anyway.
It's been done to hide some bad news, I'll bet. I don't know what the bad news is, but it will have been done to, probably something to do with Brexit. It'll have been done to hide some bad news. Let's get this out to the right-wing media to ensure that, and this is not me being a lefty. That's not my reason for being on here. I'm as angry as the opposition for not standing up because the opposition's frankly a joke. I mean, and this is the problem that I think that we've got. We've got a Prime Minister who comes out and says this, appears to be all touchy-feely about things that, frankly, I'd rather she was a bit more honest and say, actually, we've been pretty much shafting the most vulnerable in society now for nearly 8 years, and we're going to continue doing it. But here's some good news.
Jim Johnson, Rachel Kearney, thank you for talking mental health with us.
You're welcome.
Radio City Talks Mental Health Monday. with Mick Coyle.
Now, it's probably fair to say that today, episode 1 of Mental Health Monday is, well, we're just seeing. It's a suck it and see thing. So we're just throwing things out there and people will enjoy the conversation, get involved in the conversation, or think, oh, it's not for me. That's absolutely fine. We're going to have loads of really strong opinions on this show, some of which you will agree with, some of which you will disagree with, some which you will think are completely irrelevant to you, others which might be absolutely spot on. If you have got an opinion, though, when it comes to mental health matters, do drop us an email. My email address never changes. It's Mick, as in Michael, M-I-C-K, at radiocity.co.uk. That's Mick at radiocity.co.uk. If you're listening to the show live today on the radio, that's absolutely perfect on Radio City Talk. And if you're listening via the podcast as well, thank you for doing that. If you get the podcast, there will be some extra content into the mix as well. Just FYI, you get a little bit more on the podcast, but it's always worth checking out every Monday from 2:15 right here on Radio City Talk. We had a very prominent politician in the city of Liverpool, Richard Kemp, on the show a couple of days ago now, actually, and he was talking about his own attitude to mental health after a personal situation he found himself involved in. He said that 2017 is going to be the year where he changes his own mind when it comes to how he thinks about mental health.
We tend to be very disparaging about mental health, and I've used inappropriate language myself. I've called people a bunch of nutters, and that's entirely wrong, because that's a pejorative term for some people who are mentally ill. So there are some things that are very easy for us to do. We should be understanding that people with a mental illness is no different if you have a chemical imbalance in your brain than having a chemical imbalance in your liver. It isn't your fault. You can be addicted to things in a very different way if you do have a problem with your brain. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but we tend to be scared of it, don't we? Because your brain is you. Some people say it would be your soul. It's your entity. If that starts going a bit peculiar, then we don't know how to deal with it. So what do? If someone's broken their leg, that's all right. You carry them around, you help them. If someone's got a problem with their brain, you worry about that effect on you and what's going to happen to you. And then another thing we can do is actually lobby about this. So I will give credit to our local MP, Luciana Berger, who does a lot of work in mental health. My own colleague, Norman Lamb, the Lib Dem MP. So people from all parties are now waking up to this and are working together on this issue. Because mental health problems lead to physical health problems, and physical health problems lead to mental health problems. These are closely connected. If you're obese, it's quite likely you're obese because you're sad. If you're sad, it's quite likely you'll eat more or drink more to cope, so you'll become obese. So these are clearly heavily linked, and we don't understand that, and we need to deal with them both together.
You say in your blog, we all need to put pressure on the NHS to fully recognise the needs short, medium and long term of the mentally ill. Like many other conditions, early diagnosis and support can lead to the elimination or amelioration of the condition. Many people with severe depression recover. Others need small amounts of help by medicines or even better social interaction and live healthy and active lives. But it's not just down to the NHS, it's down to all of us as well.
Absolutely. It takes us back to the last article about loneliness. Loneliness is a major cause of mental health problems. Changing things is a major cause. People who happily retire, you think, that's great, they've got a good pension. The number of people who die within 6 months of retiring because they've suddenly had all their support mechanisms, all their mates, all their ambitions, all their targets taken away from them. So people change jobs, people lose jobs, people move houses, people lose a loved one. All of these cause mental health problems. They're not inevitable. A lot could be stopped.
You say as well, loneliness is a killer. Now, it is, and a lot of what Mental Health Monday is about talking about mental health in a different way. But for us as a nation to start thinking loneliness kills people, people die as a result of loneliness, or people have negative health impacts as a result of loneliness, that's a big shift. Because if people say, what are the big killers, people will go, getting hit by a bus, a knife or a gun. That's what kills you. The idea that we start thinking loneliness kills people is a big shift, isn't it?
It is, and that's why we need a culture change. That's why I'm delighted you're having these Monday morning programmes about this. We really need to talk about mental health and the problems of poor mental health. Now, no one dies directly of loneliness. Of course they don't. But it's what it leads to. It leads to physical activity. It leads to depression, which then leads to things. So if we want to tackle the root causes, we try and make our communities, our neighbourhoods, much more friendly, much more inclusive places. A lot of the mental health problems that we face are caused by the way we live. Why don't we have days, I think you've suggested it yourself, where we just turn the bloody phone off? Why don't we have days when we go to a restaurant with people? I go to restaurants sometimes. I'm sometimes by myself, so I have my iPad out. There are 4 people on the table, and they're not talking to each other. They've got their iPads on. Why don't we rediscover the art of conversation? Why don't we use those lovely parks in Liverpool? All sorts of things that we can do together cost no money, but will make a massive difference to people's lives by improving their own feeling, their own condition, and improving the positiveness of their lives.
It's that idea of mindfulness, Richard, and I've got a feeling it's a theme that's going to keep coming around on the programme. Thank you for your time today.
A pleasure.
And that wraps up Mental Health Monday, Episode 1. Thank you to everybody who's been involved. Coming up next week, we'll be hearing about a clinical psychology fringe festival coming to Liverpool. Dr. Stephen Weatherhead will join us on the programme as we continue to discuss mental health. We've got loads of guests lined up in the coming weeks as well. But if you're listening to the show and feel like you want to take part, do drop me an email. If you're not the sort of person who wants to come on the radio and talk about it, then send in your thoughts via email, mick@radiocity.co.uk. I'll happily read them off air. If you want me to read them on air, that's absolutely brilliant. I will do as part of the programme. But also, if it's just a personal story that you don't want your name reading or anything like that, stick that in the email as well, and I'll make sure that if you don't want your name reading out, I won't read out your name. It's entirely up to you, but that's what Mental Health Monday is all about. It returns 2:15 next Monday, right here on Radio City Talk.
Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.